Hi, everyone. Welcome to Unconvention. We're just going to wait for a few seconds before we start the session. All right, I think participants are trickling in. So in the interest of time, I'm going to start. So
Akshita, you're on mute. Sorry to intervene.
Sorry, thanks, Ali. Hi, everyone. I'm Akshita from Will Grow Innovations Foundation, and I'm extremely excited to welcome you all to week 2, Harnessing Capital and Markets for Good at Unconvention 2022, Making It Possible. As you're aware, Unconvention is one of India's largest convening of the social enterprise ecosystem. And this year, we're conducting Unconvention a little differently to enable maximum accessibility. We have planned sessions across the next few weeks based on specific themes. These sessions are designed to open pathways to knowledge, resources, finance, and markets for social entrepreneurs. Not just that, we're also hosting closed-door curated discussions for social entrepreneurs with relevant investors and funders. Before we start, a few guidelines for the attendees. All of you are requested to type in your questions into the Q&A chat box. We'll allot the last 10 minutes of the session and try and answer the questions. And secondly, we're going to be sharing a feedback form with you, which includes an impact survey that Will Grow is conducting. We request you to please fill this out because it's going to help us gauge your experience and plan our sessions, future sessions a lot better. So without further ado, I'm going to hand it over to my colleague, Anubha, who's going to give us a brief introduction to the session. Over to you, Anubha.
Thank you, Akshita. Hello, everyone, and welcome to today's panel discussion on how is gender-forward approach a smart business proposition towards growth. As businesses today seek new growth markets and sources of revenue, they are realizing the potential of the untapped female labor force. Women who are 40% of the global labor force, 43% of the world's agricultural labor, and more than half of the world's university students, tapping into this talent and also their productive potential would create tremendous growth in the entrepreneurship sector with the value chains of employees, customers, suppliers, and distributors. To leverage this untapped potential, Will Grow, in partnership with CEW, launched the Powering Livelihoods program, an ambitious $3 million initiative to mainstream clean energy solutions in rural livelihoods with gender-inclusive strategies at its core. The program, through its technical assistance, mentoring, and financial aid, is accelerating 15 renewable energy-based enterprises, relooking at their businesses through a gender-forward approach. Highlighting how the gender-forward approach is not just a social imperative, but makes for a smart business proposition is the aim of the discussion for today. To take the discussion forward, I would like to introduce the moderator for the session today, that is Mr. Amar Gokhale, Associate Vice President, Livelihoods and Gender at Intellicap. Amar leads the gender-related work at Intellicap and has worked across topics such as gender lens investing, gender mainstreaming, gender impact assessment, and researching the care economy. He has advised on gender analysis of investors and lenders, creating gender action plans to build and strengthen frameworks that enable product design, sourcing, due diligence, dispersal, and post-dispersal processes. In turn, enabling the deployment of more capital to women entrepreneurs through a gender lens. He has a specific interest in supporting GLI to be applied to gender-forward businesses. Really excited to have him on board today, and let's find out what the eminent speakers present here today have in store for the audience. Over to you, Amar, to kick off the panel discussion.
Thank you, Anubha. Thanks a lot for the introduction. And you're absolutely right. I am especially interested in gender lens investing as applied to gender-forward businesses, which is why I'm especially glad to be part of this panel. Good evening to everyone, and thank you for joining us for this panel today. Anubha, it was good to hear about the Powering Livelihoods program, and I think it is a much-needed intervention to substantively support businesses in mainstreaming gender. Clean energy is one of the two very important sectors to focus on for such efforts, the other being sustainable agriculture. And that's because women and children are often most vulnerable to climate change, and orienting or reorienting these sectors to have a focus on women can effectively build their resilience. The private sector, of course, has a role to play, and indeed, businesses have much to gain from such an orientation or a reorientation. So this reorientation needs to be both internal and external, and there is real business value to be had here. In addition to the labor force statistics that you mentioned earlier, Anuba, it is estimated that by 2028, women will control over $15 million of global consumer spending, clearly indicating the need to focus on women consumers. Research has also estimated that increasing women's participation in the workforce by 25% could add up to $5 trillion to the global economy by 2025. There is enterprise level research as well. In 2019, the ILO conducted a worldwide survey on the impact of gender diversity initiatives on over 10,000 enterprises. And not only did gender diverse businesses report higher profits, but other benefits as well, like higher productivity, improved ability to attract talent, achieve greater creativity, innovation, openness, and an enhanced corporate reputation. And this diversity is important across hierarchies. The IFC has found that having women on boards improves governance practices and risk management, increases return on investment, and strengthens ethical conduct. So given this background, this session really seeks to foreground the conversation about how a gender-forward approach is a smart business proposition. And we have a stellar panel here today with panelists having direct experience in operating or investing in companies that are gender-forward and can speak to the associated benefits. So in no particular order, I'll just quickly introduce everybody. We have Nidhi Pant, who is co-founder at S4S Technologies. We have Shipra Nair, Business Development Advisor at Shell Foundation. We have Tushar Devidayal, founder and CEO at Devidayal Solar Solutions. And we have Maya Chandrasekaran, MD at Green Eartha and ACT Grants. Thank you everybody for joining us today. And to start off, I would request Nidhi to speak a little bit about S4S and how it works with women.
Thanks, Amar. Hello, everyone. S4S stands for Science for Society. We convert farm losses to value-added products. It's a food processing platform where we manufacture food ingredients for large corporates like Nestle, Marico, Unilever, Indian Railways, and also small hotel, restaurant, catering industry. And all of this is done by our women entrepreneurs. We work with women entrepreneurs at the village level by providing them the right combination of access to finance, a technology through which they can process the produce, have the value addition done at the farm gate, and also market access. So the entire training is done by S4S team to create micro entrepreneurs for both procurement of fresh produce from farmers and also processing the produce. And they make different type of ingredients starting from spices, pulses, grains, fruits, and vegetables, thus providing them an assured additional income and giving the money directly in their hands. They found a new identity as climate champions in their societies. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks for that, Nidhi. And I'm glad you used the word micro entrepreneurs and that S4S is encouraging the entrepreneurial spirit with the women that it works with. And you did speak about access to finance, technology, market access, and we would love to hear about that a little bit more. But for now, I would like to come to Shipra, and maybe Shipra, if you could just talk about Shell Foundation's approach to channeling capital with a gender lens and share some of the learnings. I think that will be great.
Sure. Thank you for having me here. First of all, Wilgrow and Amar, really privileged. For everyone, I'm Shipra. I'm part of the UK registered charity Shell Foundation, where I manage one of our gender-focused program called Powered with FCDO in India. And I also support some of the enterprises to help them scale up across sustainable mobility and access to energy themes. Gender equity is something which is mission critical for Shell Foundation, given its relevance to both business growth as well as development impact. We have been quite purposeful in our investment approach, and we also share our evidence to prompt broader industry change. We believe that an inclusive business is a better investment. Therefore, we also measure and we track gender inclusivity along with business performance. Now, Shell Foundation has various gender programs, but I would just like to refer to Powered, of which Powering Livelihoods is also a part of. Powered is something we kicked off 4 years ago, along with FCDO in India, with a laser sharp focus on gender, where our goals were around creating women micro-entrepreneurs, creating jobs for women, as well as supporting women-led businesses. During the course of this panel discussion, I would like to share some of the impact that we have made around Powered and dive a little bit deeper into it.
Yeah, thanks for that, Shipra. I think you mentioned two very important words. One is purpose and the other is evidence. And it's good to see that the evidence for the business case of gender mainstreaming is getting built and strengthened. And it's something that's very important to crowd in more interest and capital. Which brings me to Tushar. Tushar, please tell us about your journey and experience in mainstreaming gender within your company.
Yeah, thanks, Omar. And again, thanks to Wilgrow for having us here. We're part of the Powering Livelihood final cohort, and extremely happy to be part of this journey. Kalyani, can I have my slides, please? Great, thank you. So quick overview on our company. We're the solar refrigerator people. That's the short and sweet thing. We're based in Mumbai in India. We are active in India and East Africa. Most of our solar refrigerator and cooling solutions solve the problems of food wastage, spoilage. We focus on livelihoods in retail, agriculture, dairy, and fishing. And really, as a company, we had started with focus on SDG 7 and 8, affordable and clean energy, and then decent work, livelihoods. And as we started discovering value chains, almost by accident, we stumbled upon some of them. We realized how important SDG 5 is. This is an admission I'm not embarrassed to make. But on the next slide, I'll show you some more. Next slide, please. So we've done well over 500 solar refrigerators in India, multiple refrigerators in Africa. 82% of our entrepreneurs are from rural areas, and we focus on gender-focused value chains. Over 50% of our fridges are installed with women micro-entrepreneurs. We've done some impact studies where there's an average of 5,000 to 7,000 rupees of increased incremental income per month across various typologies. And I think that the value chains that we really worked on and stumbled across were the fish retail, fruit pulp, and goat milk. It happened that these were dominated by women micro-entrepreneurs. The women in our community were the people reselling fish. The women were the primary people who went out into the forest, collected sitafal and jamun, which are non-timber forest produce, brought it into the processing centers. And similarly with goat milk, they were the people milking, storing, and selling the milk. Next slide, please. So again, this is more photo heavy, but more about the value chains where we worked on. On the top left is what you see is a typical Kirana store with a woman micro-entrepreneur in Bhawanipatna in Orissa. You see a goat milk installation. This is in Tonk in Rajasthan. That's the top right. On the bottom left, again in Rajasthan, in Udaipur district, that's jamun pulping. And then you can see that it's frozen and put into solar freezers. And then that truck on the bottom right is something that we innovated with and got a go-to-market solution with solar panels on the truck. That's a typical Tata Yodha that's now converted into a 1-ton solar coal plant. So I'll pause there. This was to give us a flavor of what DD Solar is doing with the help of Powering Livelihoods. Thanks, Omar.
Yeah. Thanks a lot for that, Tushar. And I think it's good to hear that mainstreaming gender can sometimes be a journey of discovery, and it can bring associated benefits that I'm sure you can talk about a little later. But coming to Maya, we would love to hear from you about your experience as an investor into looking at how gender is being mainstreamed, the importance of data, and how it plays into decision making and associated challenges.
Sure. Thanks so much, Amar. And, thanks to the Wilgrow team. Fantastic to be here. I'm going to just start off by saying that I probably come with a slightly different context to many of the others on this panel. So I'll just take a minute or two to kind of explain maybe the one or two hats that I'm wearing as part of this conversation. My work as an investor is actually sort of manifold. On the one hand, I am the co-founder of a climate investment and innovation firm, where we look obviously at companies that sit kind of at that intersection of innovation, climate impact, and scale. But at the same time, I'm also the co-founder of the Women in Investing Network, which is a platform essentially for women capital allocators to come together and essentially collaborate, learn from each other, build platforms, build networks, build insights, find opportunities. And then I think the third thing that I do within kind of this broader ecosystem of gender is I'm one of the members of an Andy Gender Action Lab. And the outcome of that is a soon to be launched alliance for sort of leading investors in India to come together and to think about how to make their own funding processes more gender neutral, and also to change the funding outcomes for female entrepreneurs. So, these are kind of the different hats that I wear. And to come back to your question, Amar, on, from the investment perspective, what is it that, I'm seeing and I'm looking at? I think you used a couple of words earlier in the conversation around sort of gender diverse teams. And I think that's kind of the critical piece for us, which is that as an investor, what's important for me and for the team as we look at opportunities is how diverse is the team. It's not, necessarily sort of focus on one specific gender versus the other, but we see diversity as being critical to bringing in different experiences, different thought processes, different skill sets, and different understandings of the market. But I think one thing that I will call out is, this very strong sense of the market opportunity for, organizations that are essentially addressing various aspects of gender, whether they are selling products which are specifically focused on women, or whether the workforce is primarily women. I think that's a very underspoken or underexplored topic. I've been in far too many meetings and pitch sessions where opportunities are sort of dismissed as addressing niche markets. I don't understand how 50% of the market is niche. So I think that there are a lot of things that can be sort of reconsidered, redefined, processes have to be relooked at, and that's kind of the broader approach that I bring.
Hi, I think I dropped out for a second there, but can everybody hear me? Okay, great.
Yes, Amar.
Yeah. Thanks for that, Maya, and you're absolutely right. So Nidhi, back to you. You spoke about access to.
Amar, do you want to just switch off camera for a bit? That might help from a bandwidth perspective.
Hi, sorry, I seem to have some trouble with my connection.
Yeah. Hi, Amar. Yeah, Amar, would you want to maybe
Can everybody hear?
Yes. I think
I can just explain more about, and I totally agree with Maya, what she's been saying about the market sizing. So that's really important. When we started our work with S4S, what we looked at is how can we marry both what a woman wants. So what are the constraints that she is living in? Firstly, we looked at they wanted work staying at home so they can take care of their families, and segmenting these smallholder women farmers. This was the belt that we were looking at, the women farmers who want work staying at home. They also don't have any upfront investment that they can make. They don't have any bank accounts or any, they don't hold any land as an asset because of the patriarchal norms. The land holding is either going to the brother or to the husband. So she had these 2 to 3 constraints that we identified, that there could not be any upfront investment. They wanted work staying at home. They wanted flexible work hours, but they were really eager to work, and started our small pilot with Powering Livelihoods, supported by Shell Foundation, where we tried to marry both the things, that what we as an organization needed, which was a sustainable supply of processed ingredients. Our customers are very sensitive about quality. And can this be done by these women? And the answers were yes. And then what is our responsibility as an organization was to come out of these barriers that they are having. So they don't have access to finance. We have partnered with regional rural banks as well as nationalized banks today, who started giving them loans at 6%. When we earlier were getting financing for these equipments that can be deployed at the farm gate, we started at 24%. So doing that small pilots, and then now today we partner with SBI, RRBs, so that these women have access to these technology at a very affordable rate of interest. So financing was available to them. Second was whether we can do training of not only the process produced, but in general, making the women building her agency. So starting from nutrition to finance, how can they do peer-to-peer learning sessions? So training and capacity building is a very important part of what we do. And the third part was that what are the other barriers they are facing in terms of technology? They are all have not qualified class 10. So making things and reporting, how will they look at quality, things very easy and intuitive for them. So our machines are IoTized, that today there will be an alarm. So the woman knows that she needs to take out the material, and teaching them very smaller things that can actually help them access this entire processing as a value addition. So the women just needs to invest 4 to 6 hours of her time, and she can stay at home, take care of her kids, be engaged in other activities also. And the women also needed a continuous amount of work, not like 100 days where they are doing cotton plucking, then they don't know what to do. So providing them that continuity of work, that additional income of 6,000 to 10,000 rupees per month. This month, we are very happy that we are working with 800 micro entrepreneurs across 3 major states of India. So providing them an assured additional income which directly goes in their hand, making a bank account for them, so they now have more control over their spending. So they're spending either on better education for their kids or getting more healthcare facilities for their families. So this is what we primarily did. And I'm sure, Amar, this is what you were referring to. So if you're back, I would hand it over to you. Thank you so much.
Yeah, thanks a lot for that, Nidhi, and sorry for my connection challenges, but I think I'm back. It's good to hear about how you have been able to harness some of these market efficiencies by working with women. And Tushar, coming to you now, any thoughts, anything that you would like to add here? Maybe some additionalities brought in by working with women that you have observed at your company.
Yeah, I think our first deployments in those photographs I showed you across dairy, fruit pulp, and fish vending, we realized slowly that there were repeat customers coming from those 3 segments, and also most of the repeat customers were more women micro entrepreneurs. That kind of led us to some thought process on how do we really look at this segment. And Maya, it's not a niche, it's 50% of the market, it's huge, right? So we then worked with Powering Livelihoods, who really helped us look at all the data we had, those 500 plus installations, and then do a gender disaggregated kind of KYC, if you want, of all our customers. And I think that was really eye-opening. That just doing that, I think, is the first step to any gender-based strategy or gender-forward strategy. You got to know where you are so that you can target where you want to go. And once that happened, and this was with a gentle nudge from Powering Livelihoods that we finally got that done. We were able to develop a strategy that actually just made pure business sense, that these are the value chains. They happen to be women dominated. Let's tailor our marketing strategy to that. And again, Powering Livelihoods brought in an agency called Value for Women, because even though we're a small team of about 15 people, we have 30% women as our employee base. We wanted buy-in on the gender strategy from all of us, all 15 of us. And that training session by Value for Women, provided by Powering Livelihoods, was also eye-opening, almost as much as the gender disaggregation and the data disaggregation that we did. So, these are great. And I think that investors, donors certainly have a role to play, and they're playing it quite well, at least when it comes to our program. Demo units going out, end user subsidies for women. We've had a first loss default guarantee set up with a consumer financing angle, with an interest rate subvention for women micro entrepreneurs. So I'm really thankful to Powering Livelihoods for helping us steer in the right direction. So those are some of my comments, Amar.
Yeah, thanks a lot for that, Tushar. And you're absolutely right. Gender disaggregated data is indeed a very important first step to self-assess. And not only are companies beginning to do that, but also capital providers are now beginning to do that. Not just investors, but also banks and lending institutions are also beginning to do that. And I would love to hear about gender disaggregated data from both Shipra and Maya, coming from the other side. But Shipra, specifically to you, I'm sure you have seen many businesses that have attempted to mainstream gender. We have 2 success stories here, but I'm sure there would be failures as well. So what do you think the ecosystem needs to do? What support needs to be provided to help businesses mainstream gender, and how do you think Shell Foundation is doing that?
Sure. Thanks for that, Amar. I'm just going to keep my video off because the voice is breaking for me a little bit. First of all, bravo, Nidhi and Tushar, right? The work that you all have been doing, not just for your own startups, but also paving a way for others to follow. I think from an investor perspective, there are 2 things that the 2 main questions that come up. One is, why do we need to invest in gender? And the second is, if we are bought into that, how do we go about doing it, right? So although we have seen various examples, I would just like to share some numbers as to why Shell Foundation believes in investing in gender, and why do we think it's just good business. So over the years, we have seen very clear business value of adopting a gender-forward approach. Within our portfolio, I can give you some examples. We saw over 40% of our portfolio companies seeing growth in sales and client retention, over 87% seeing improved client satisfaction, and majority seeing increase in income of women micro entrepreneurs, including S4S and Devi Dayal. This is just within our portfolio, along with the macro factors, Amar, that you mentioned about the critical role that women can play contributing to the global GDP. And we also know that when we are investing in a woman, we are not just investing in her, but we are actually investing in a generation, because over 90% of what a woman makes, she reinvests it back into the family. So you're basically starting a virtuous cycle, right? Even if we look at the Powering Livelihoods program, that has generated sufficient evidence for us. As an investor, we saw over 4,600 deployments of clean energy assets, over 83% of which were women beneficiaries. We saw 5 successful commercial fundraise enabling the sector, and we saw almost 2x growth in revenue of the enterprises across Powering Livelihoods. So all of this has been really, confirming that investing in gender brings a lot of business value. But for us, the role of gender lens investing doesn't just end there. It goes beyond helping the enterprises scale up. It also goes into sharing the learnings and the evidence that we create, which can feed into creation of a much more favorable policy environment where enterprises like S4S and Devi Dayal can thrive. Yeah. So we are very pleased to also see how the learnings from Powering Livelihoods actually contributed towards the development of a policy framework for DRE for livelihoods in India. And with this forward-looking move from the Ministry of New and Renewable Energy, India has now become the first nation in the world to formally champion decentralized renewable energy for livelihoods with a very strong focus on women and marginalized communities. India is showing a way to the global south now on how do we leverage green technologies as a vehicle to, create jobs and economic growth for everyone, including women. And these are very powerful indicators, right, that we are headed in the right direction. And this is also my appeal to the other investors who are, standing at the fence right now, thinking whether this is a good idea or not. Let me assure you it is. But when it comes to how do we go about doing it, we are always very open to share our learnings and our experiences. I'll be happy to speak more about it if Amar would like me to, about the approach that has worked for Shell Foundation. Of course, it has been a very long and iterative journey. This is not something we can achieve overnight, but also it has been a very fruitful one. I'll just pause there, Amar.
Yeah, thanks for that, Shipra. And we would love to hear about, the approach. And I just like to bring in Maya here for a second. You spoke about the approach as well. I think you used the word funding processes. So how can these funding processes of all of these investors be made gender neutral? Do you think being gender neutral is good enough, or do you think one needs to go a step further and say, how can they be gender aware?
Yeah, so I think that's a really good point. And I think really the intent is to be gender aware. And I'll just kind of step back and provide a little bit more context on some of the approaches, and would love to hear Shipra's, what Shipra's experience has been as well. So when we think about improving the funding outcomes, and that's kind of the problem statement that we start off with, which is improving the funding outcomes for female entrepreneurs. That's like the starting point. There were a couple of different approaches, and we essentially identified capital as a very significant lever for success, and capital especially at the very early stages, which is where there is a high level of I would say subjectivity in the selection process. Once you have numbers, then the entire sort of selection and funding process becomes a lot more quantitative, it becomes more objective. But in the early stages, it's really much more subjective. And that's where we essentially saw that there is an opportunity to think about not just processes. Actually, Amar, I think the approach that we've taken is kind of two-pronged. It's both processes and team. And the reason we call that out is because we have seen that there are quite significant differences when you have gender diverse investment teams versus investment teams that are not, from a funding perspective. The other area, the other approach, I would say, or the other area of intervention is really around the funding processes, which is a complete relook at and a complete review and sort of starting from like almost from the foundation of, why are certain processes, why are certain criteria used around evaluation is, I think, a critical piece of this approach, because many of the sort of evaluation, filtering, and conversion processes that are used right now are legacy and haven't really been questioned to date. But I think that there is a real value to digging into them and understanding what are some of the inherent and maybe sort of implicit biases in those processes. So I would say that that's the second part of the approach. And then I think the third part of the approach is more from the perspective of female entrepreneurs and really understanding, how do they need support in terms of accessing the various resources that they need, capital being, I think, a very critical one. So I'll just pause here and see if you had any follow-on questions or if there's anything else that I could clarify.
Well, thanks for that, Maya. I think you did speak about bias, and I can share from our experience at Intellicap as well. We recently, interacted with multiple investors who have been wanting into the gender space. And in our interactions with them, in our candid interactions with them, bias came out quite a lot. So there is still bias even for investors who want to do GLI. There is still some internal implicit bias that they need to get over. And this bias, of course, might be both among men and among women. So this is something that really needs to be addressed. There is a question in the chat box that is for Shipra. So Shipra, if you want to take that and then maybe continue where you left off.
Let me see one moment. Yeah, so I think to understand Shell Foundation's contribution to the DRE sector within India, I would recommend that you have a look at the Powering Livelihoods program to begin with, which is a combination of market and enterprise accelerator, where we are supporting enterprises that are active within the DRE for livelihood space, but at the same time, significant research and learnings have been generated, which have also contributed to the new policy framework that has now come out. In addition, I would also drop in a link to the Shell Foundation website where you can also see our global work in the sector and what is upcoming. I hope that will help.
Great. And Shipra, if you want to talk about the approaches that you mentioned earlier, that'll be great.
What Maya said as well, right? From an investment perspective, what are the various things that are considered? Capital, of course, being one of the key ones, right? So in terms of a very structured approach, if I have to look at a gender lens investing, it starts with a good understanding of what is the type and quantum of capital that we have, and where do we think it can be the most catalytic. So identifying those pockets where it makes sense. For example, from Shell Foundation, we have invested not just in energy for access for energy, but also in unconventional areas for women like sustainable mobility, right? Where other investors aren't going in yet that heavy on the gender angle. So where is it that we can make the most of gender impact by bringing in that additionality? Second is to use the tools which are there at our disposal to basically measure and analyze. Tushar spoke about gender disaggregated data. Maya also spoke about the screening processes, which are quite legacy and have inherent biases in them. So how do we actually go beyond the traditional screening processes to look beyond what is actually visible? When we are trying to analyze an enterprise, we try to also look at who are the hidden influencers. Yeah, many times men are buying the product, but it's women who are using it. Yeah, many times potential investees themselves may not even know that they are making a gender impact. Like Tushar stumbled upon it, like he mentioned, right? That there is a huge potential for them. So for the investors to also go one step beyond what is visible on the surface. And then, of course, the most important part, and this is something that I say very often, the keyword here is commitment. Commitment for capital. Dedicated, high-risk, ring-fenced funding, which can be used for gender intervention and experiments to see what we can do. Commitment to technical assistance for gender support. This could be an area where SMEs may need a lot more support compared to the other areas. And we also try to catalyze business innovation using gender as a first thought, not as an afterthought. So the earlier you imbibe this into the process, the better results that you get. And lastly, we also would say that a very important part is also to continuously share the data and learnings, because this is a huge problem. Gender equity is a global challenge, right? It's a worthy goal, but it's a shared challenge that we all have. So we have to share our learnings. We have to join our hands to tackle this. And that is why it's very important to nudge other ecosystem players, share the data, share the evidence, so that we can tackle this problem together.
Got it. Yeah, thanks for that, Shipra. And having spoken about how can we influence investors who are sitting on the fence or who are looking to explore gender lens investing, and how can they be nudged? Coming to the other side, Tushar and Nidhi, as entrepreneurs, I'm sure there are other entrepreneurs who are looking at you, who are thinking about how they can move forward within own organizations with gender mainstreaming. So what message would you give to them? Of course, Tushar, you had access to technical assistance and some capital, but for many of them who might not, what would be your message?
Yeah. So again, I'd go back to how do you show impact? How do you show what you're doing, whether it's a gender focus or gender lens or a gender strategy, and you have to disaggregate data, but then beyond that, you have to record data. So whether if you're doing a deployment, you have to have your baseline, midline, endline. And as a company, as an entrepreneur, you have to take that very, very seriously, because at the end of the day, a donor, an investor is giving you money, and all they're asking for in return is data. And that data has to be quality data. It has to be quantitative, qualitative, but it has to be good data, preferably third party, impact assessment. So I think data, learnings, case studies, etc. A company that has those will attract better investment or more investment. I think we've been fortunate that our investors, our donors, our incubators are already enterprises and organizations who just get it. They understand our issues, that scaling is a problem. We've got a good product, we've got good intentions, but how do we scale? And Wilgrow calls this the commercial value of death. And this is something that actually drew me to apply to the Powering Livelihoods program, because I was right at that brink where we had done enough pilots, but we didn't know how to cross that commercial value of death. And external consultants, whether it comes to helping you find the market, replicating your gender strategy, helping you look at the data you've generated, making that data presentable to investors is all very, very important. And that's what I would recommend to other entrepreneurs.
All right. Thanks for that, Tushar. Nidhi, any thoughts?
No, I think definitely I agree with what Tushar has been saying, but I think what entrepreneurs can do is that challenge the status quo. I know as cliche it sounds, but I can give you an example of our organization where our women entrepreneurs are procuring this from other farmers. They're competing with other traders in the whole vicinity, and there's a big power change. So two barriers that they face is that why would a male farmer who's actually coming to sell the produce, it's always the male who's taking out and the produce and selling and going into the market. He doesn't want to sell it to a woman. He feels, how she qualified enough to actually tell me the value of my crop. And these are small nuances that actually are so important to be crossed for women to have more equitable position in the entire dynamics, for us to think gender first that okay, this can happen. A lot of times our advisors our ecosystem was saying that why are we even going, let us go with an FPO. Why do we want to complicate our lives where women want to now start buying the produce? They are competing with age-old traders in the market. They have more working capital strength, and that's when I think the whole entrepreneurial mindset, I think this first step with processing really helped the organization to really take on that challenge, that let's try and see what is the harm to first think gender first. So I think apart from all the qualitative data that makes an organization more ready for an investment to happen and convince the investor, there's also a lot of grit that can be done with market forces, with just that intention to have that change and really believe that we can actually procure. So that self-belief that the women needs to have should be, they can derive it from entrepreneurs like us, where we are showing that we believe in them. You just look at the place that they all come from, right? No one in their family has actually told them that they can do something. So that self-belief is so important for each woman to develop, and specifically the area that we all are working in. So really very qualitative in these areas, but I think the entrepreneurial value add is only that, going that extra mile and doing it and executing it and trying it, failing and seeing what can be changed, and, pulling out all resources of Shell Foundation, Wilgrow, to make all of this happen. So I think that's this, I would say, secret sauce. There's no right combination for it. But I think that is something that is most entrepreneurial that you can do.
Got it. Yeah, thanks for that, Nidhi. And it's quite evident from what Tushar said and what Nidhi said that there's a lot of pre-work, that goes into getting yourself ready to even start on the journey of gender mainstreaming before we can even think about going to investors or external parties from an entrepreneur's perspective. So Shipra, how do you think that journey can be eased? Is there a role to play for the likes of Shell Foundation? Who else would you like to see play into this market? And what message would you give to others who want to support this? So yeah, and I see that we have about 5 minutes left. So Shipra, if you could just reflect on that, and then maybe I'll come to the others to hear some closing comments.
Sure. I think I would like all the investors to think about this, right? Until the point we reach where we don't have to talk about gender or diversity as separate, dedicated topics, and it just becomes a way of life and way of thinking. One of the things that I would share is that it requires patience. Impact evolves over time, behaviors change over time. What is really important is for us to be consistent and for our approaches to be iterative. Nidhi mentioned that there are a lot of small nuances that play a role. So gender is nuanced. It is very contextual. It varies from countries to countries, state to state, sector to sector. But there are interventions needed everywhere. And it's very important that even from an investor perspective, that we follow a very iterative approach where we test the solutions against market barriers with the enterprises until we reach that point where we find a strategy that works. This will, of course, require capital. This will require resources. This will require patience. And again, this will require commitment, not just from an investor, but from the enterprises, the entrepreneurs, as well as their teams. So this has to be done jointly. And again, my thought would be that the patience, commitment are the key. But this is definitely an area where I see a lot of potential. It's half of our demographics, so not niche anymore. And it's time that we gather the strength to actually do something about it.
Yeah, thanks a lot for that, Shipra. Maya, any closing thoughts from your side?
Yeah, I'm just going to be lazy and jump on what Shipra was saying. But just to add to that, I think, I think both Shipra and I are speaking from the perspective of the funder. And for me, that's a very sort of intentional choice as well to speak from the perspective of the funder, because I do believe that, as I said earlier, one, capital is a key lever, but also that there is a significant sort of power that capital has right now. And so that's a space where you can make impact. When you have that power, you have that ability to make impact. I think all of the, I'll do a +1 to all of the things that Shipra talked about in terms of what we need to move this forward. But I'll add, I think, just one more, which is that, we're already seeing as an investor, what do we care about? We care about a certain type of return, whether that's a number return or an impact return. So we need to be able to have more of that data out there. So there is everyone over here has talked about the quantitative aspect. At the same time, I think there are really compelling and powerful narratives. And so those need to be shared. And I think that, we need to be able to showcase, really engaging, powerful stories and put those two together in a way that kind of joins the dots, because that combination of data and a story is essentially what will drive investors and change behaviors.
All right, thanks a lot for that, Maya. And Tushar, I hope with the support that you have received, you will find it easier to raise capital as you move forward. And I hope you have already seen signs of that. So if you'd like to share any signs that you would have seen, please do. But otherwise, Anuva, over to you.
Yeah, just a quick one. I think I get asked this sometimes is when it comes to a gender strategy, is it founder's intent or is it investor mandate? And is it a chicken and egg story? And, for me, it's always been fairly collaborative with Powering Livelihood. Yeah, sometimes I need a nudge. Sometimes I need a reminder. As long as your fundamental core belief is there, your mission statement includes gender, and it should include gender. If you're going to be a gender forward company, it should be very clearly mentioned in your mission statement. It really doesn't matter then whether it's investor's mandate or founder's intent. It doesn't matter which comes first. They both are very much needed. A founder's intent is then left unfulfilled if there's no money to back it. And it's the same with an investor. If they can't find a gender forward company or someone who's aligned with their investment mandate, then that money remains unused. So no chicken, no egg. Thank you.
Great. Thank you so much, to all the speakers for sharing their expertise with us. It was indeed a really insightful discussion. And thank you, Amar, for moderating the powerful discussion. I certainly gained some interesting insights, and I'm sure our participants also feel very much the same. Stay tuned for week 2 on harnessing capitals and markets for good. As coming up next, we have 2 more sessions planned for tomorrow, that is 25th Feb, which is on unlocking market accessibility for new age agri-businesses through FPOs at 4 p.m. and why hasn't the promise of blended finance scaled up at 6:30 p.m. IST. If you still haven't, do register for the upcoming sessions. Thank you everyone who joined us today, and see you again very soon. Thank you.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.